Hello, everybody. Welcome to another preview edition of the Frogs Insider podcast. I am Melissa Triebwasser. And guys, if you feel me fangirling, it's because I am sitting here with Jeremy Taché, one of my absolute favorite voices in sports, a member of my favorite podcast on the planet outside of the Frogs Insider podcast, the Dan LeBatard Show, a sideline reporter for Bally Sports with the Miami Heat. So we could talk NBA basketball here, and also the host of Miami Mic'd Up podcast. This week's episode is going to be featuring one of my other favorite sports personalities, Mike Golick Jr. They're going to talk some football. They're going to talk some female pop stars. So that's a can't miss episode. Jeremy Taché, everybody, the big guest that I teased earlier this week on the podcast, is here with me to preview UCF and TCU for the first time ever on the football field. Jeremy, I've already told you, but thank you so much for being here with me today.
No, thank you. That intro was so ridiculously kind. We were talking for a minute before we started rolling, and I was almost getting teary-eyed, and now you did it again, because that was so kind of you. And to think that there's even a single person in the world that's like, oh, one of my favorite voices in sports. Come on. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm so excited to talk about UCF, and the first ever matchup between these two schools. So that's really exciting in its own right. But thank you. And to everyone listening to this, hey, thanks for giving this some time, and support Melissa because she's wonderful.
I appreciate that. I'm always amazed when people listen. When people comment oh, I heard the podcast, and I'm like, really? Okay.
Can you imagine how I feel?
No, I cannot.
It's
and I
crazy.
don't know that I ever want to. Yeah.
No, it's
people come to us for sports information. What? Yeah. How did that happen? Who knew, right?
That's certainly not me.
I think it's really cool that you and I get to sit down and talk about UCF TCU for the first time ever, because I think other than the population size of these two universities, they have run so parallel over the last decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
TCU kind of blazed the trail of taking the long and winding path to being relevant in college football. TCU walked so that UCF could run. We both had fictional national championships that we will claim for the entirety of our lives.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, fictional. Okay.
Yeah, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
We've also both been on the outside looking in opportunities where our teams deserved it. And now we're both members of the Big 12 conference. And so the first thing that I want to ask you about is, what do you think that invite to the Big 12 meant for UCF, not just as a football program, but for the university and the fan base as a whole?
It was a huge deal. To be a part of a conference with an actual, storied history, right? UCF for the last several years, I mean, decades for that matter, was sort of leading conferences that were new, leading new alignments of old conferences, leading groups that made no sense to be on the field together. And while there are now 16 teams in the Big 12 from all over the country, it's not quite the same thing as it used to be. It's weird that a school from Orlando would be in the Big 12. In the new version of college football, it was a huge deal to be one of the schools to make that switch over. As a school that's had a history of having a rivalry with USF, the University of South Florida, it was fun to get the invite without them getting the invite.
We know about that with SMU too.
Right. So. And so, it's one of those things where I think UCF has felt like a lot of the fan base for the last, and let's call it a decade, right? That ironically, that's when I got to UCF was in 2013. It was the last year of Blake Bortles. We won the Fiesta Bowl over Baylor. And it felt like the university in its own right had arrived. Ironically, 2 years after that, we were winless. And then 2 years later, we were undefeated. Weird roller coaster of a time over the 4 years that I was at UCF. But at the same time, that moment in 2013 felt like, all right, sleeping giant sort of description was now being thrown out there for UCF. Like, oh, this university has an opportunity to do some cool stuff. And to watch over the last decade as that started to come true, right? There's still so much more room to grow for such a gigantic university in the middle of Florida, where you can recruit athletes from North Florida, from Georgia, from South Florida, hotbeds for talent in this country, like Texas, like California. Basically, I just named the 4 states that have the best athletes in this country, and UCF can locally recruit so many of them. Our star running back, RJ Harvey's from right down the road. So to be able to do that now with the pedigree of the Big 12 felt like, all right, this is an amazing step in the right direction, not just for football, but hey, for the baseball program, for the softball program, for the basketball programs. every program was impacted by it. And I think that a lot of UCF fans are very excited about the future of the athletics department.
It's almost like you're professional because you really segued me perfectly into my next question. It's like you've done this before.
Weird.
Where now with that Big 12 invite, with the seat at the Power Four table, whatever that's going to look like in the future, does that put UCF in the trajectory alongside the other major universities in Florida? It is a hotbed for talent, but you're competing with Florida. You're competing with Florida State, not this year, but generally. And
Yeah.
then now maybe Miami is back. We will
Yeah.
to be determined, but maybe Miami is back. And so do you think that UCF is elevated enough as a member of the Big 12 to be able to recruit some of the athletes that might generally look to those other programs?
Look, I think they're getting there. Perfect example. Nigel Kelly is one of our defensive ends right now. He transferred from Miami to come to UCF, and obviously transfers are a different story. It's all about playing time. Their defensive line is loaded. I'm not sitting here and trying to say like, oh, clearly he chose UCF over Miami. Head to head, there were influences involved. But what I will say is, being in the Big 12, being in that Power Four, like if UCF in the first couple years in this conference can capitalize and get to a playoff, like then all bets are off, right? Whether it's as an at-large or as a conference winner, all bets are off in terms of recruiting, because UCF is already either the number 1 or number 2 recruiting class in next year's class in the conference. And that's as a newcomer, that's as a program, but led under Gus Malzahn, a guy who has pedigree in his own right. We can talk about him, probably will later.
That's my next question.
His game management style, like his game management style and the way that he coaches is one thing, but as a recruiter, he does a heck of a job. He did a heck of a job at Auburn, and he thus far has recruited. He's far out recruited. My bad, a little stumble there, even as professionals. Out recruited both Josh Heupel and Scott Frost, the guys who sort of sent us on this trajectory. And so to see, those blue chip prospects stacking up already, you have to imagine this is a huge moment for this university's football program, in that this year in particular, Miami is ascending, but both UF and FSU are seemingly on a bit of a downturn.
Pray for Billy Napier.
Hey, we go to Gainesville.
Yeah,
a huge game simply for the recruiting elements. You saw the way that some of UF's recruits responded to Miami going in there and winning. UCF's going to be trying to do some of the same things, and going and establishing like, hey, not only is this not become a Big Four, right? Like everybody always refers to the Big Three in Florida. Us UCF fans know it's already a Big Four. Even if we're the fourth, it is it is very much a Big Four. And so now, if you can capitalize and go, hey, we're a team that in this 12-team playoff era, even if we're just one of the ones on the outside looking in, we finish ranked, or we can compete in the Big 12. Like, I think a lot of UCF fans look at this season as in an open Big 12. Anything is possible.
Yeah.
Now, could we go to TCU this weekend and lose and have all of that hope derailed right away and have the fan base fracturing and freaking out? Absolutely. That's what college football is about. But at the same time, I see personally a huge opportunity in this season to sort of start that ride toward, hey, you know what? We will occasionally snag a prospect from UF or from or FSU. And you've already seen it a few times where someone who was committed to UF last second flipped over to UCF. And that's been awesome to see the last few years.
Well, we've seen it similarly with TCU and Texas, too. As down as Texas was for most of their Big 12 run when both teams were in the conference, TCU dominated that rivalry. I think won 7 out of the first 9 games. And we started to see these 4-star kids that generally were auto commits to Texas flipping over to TCU, where they could play. They could play on the big stage. They could play close to home, and they could win. And so I think UCF, you're absolutely right. That's a similar trajectory. Kind of on that note, as a follow-up, we've kind of touched on just the sheer size of UCF. How does that translate into NIL? Have you been happy with the NIL spending? Do you think that they're using that? There's obviously a ton of money being spent at Florida State, at Miami, and Florida. Is UCF going to be competitive in that realm going forward too?
I don't have like the insider information to know the specifics on the numbers. What I do know is that most of the kids that UCF sought to acquire in the transfer portal, they were able to. KJ Jefferson was a huge target. They got him. I know that they didn't end up with Grayson McCall. But I know that he and KJ were being spoken to at the same time. And so maybe that was you know what? We're not going to go so hard after Grayson. We're not going to meet him at whatever that number is. But look, they did very well in the transfer portal, which makes me, and they've done well in recruiting, which makes me believe the NIL program is doing well. The interesting thing that we've sort of always talked about with UCF is that because of how large our university is, and because of how large it's gotten over the last couple of decades, it wasn't always a school of 70,000. Basically, until the 90s, it was a school in the 20 or 30,000s. And
70,000 undergrad.
It's 70,000 undergrad, like or
Insane.
68 or something right around there. And
TCU has 12. So
right. And so, but if anything, that's the point, right? So now when you talk about like fundraising, right? When they throw out like the silly little booster fundraisers, it's like, hey, number 10 scored a touchdown, so donate $10, right? You're fishing to a much larger audience, you know? And so it's almost like we've been waiting for the UCF fan base to get older in age, because that's what I was going to mention is because of the fact that we've escalated in our size so quickly over the last couple of decades, we have one of the youngest alumni bases in the country. And in turn, we don't have a lot of the oil men that are like major boosters that can give millions to a program. It's a lot more of a collective effort. Well, when you have a giant collective in terms of 68,000 undergrad, and every year you're graduating, you know, however many students, even if it's, you know, anywhere between 8 and 12, just because you have some kids that are going 5 years. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a huge group of alumni that you can go to that, number one, you don't need as many in terms of percentage to be hugely rich and successful to be able to have some big donors. And then number two, those small donations can pile together a little bit easier. So you would think that if the right people are in charge with NIL, it should be something that, you know, UCF is very well positioned to do. And I know in speaking to people with the program, like they were very excited when NIL started to become a piece of what could happen here, because it felt like it evened the playing field even more with those other schools in the state.
It's going to be fascinating to see. You know, you touched on recruiting earlier too, and TCU and UCF have been kind of going back and forth. UCF has a higher per player average. TCU has a higher overall, and I think that's just because TCU has 24 commits. UCF has, I think, 19 when I checked yesterday. So
there you go.
These two teams, alongside Oklahoma State, Utah, probably best positioned to be annual contenders in this conference. And nobody has a bigger student body, you know, by a mile than UCF, or, you know, is between TCU and UCF, the two most fertile recruiting grounds that the schools are located in.
Oh, yeah.
So going to be very fascinating to see how much of a rivalry this becomes. Let's talk about Gus.
Yeah.
Gus is, to me, one of the most fascinating characters in all of college football. He has been at the highest of highs. He has felt the lowest of lows. But he seems to be the perfect person to be at this football program right now. What are your early impressions of him over his first couple of seasons? And do you think he's a guy that can take UCF not just to the playoffs, but be competitive once they get there?
Those are some, the deep sigh you heard was the contemplation I've had with myself over the last few years because of Gus, right? Because I'll start with the positives. Right. You have a guy who's led a major program in college athletics before in Auburn, a guy who's won a national championship leading an offense at Auburn, a guy who knows how to recruit, a guy who has been clearly more than willing to step into the NIL world of recruiting, unlike someone like Dabo Swinney, unlike Nick Saban wanted to. This is someone who's like, yeah, bring it on. I'm ready for it.
It was probably doing it before it was called NIL.
Absolutely.
Too,
yeah, of course he was. Like, of course he was, just like all these other guys were. And so he is someone who, just like you said, honestly, you nailed it. Perfect guy, perfect place, perfect time. He was the right guy to be here for this transitionary period from quote unquote group of five to now power four, right? He was the perfect guy to be at the helm. I think he is a very good coach. I think he is a very good recruiter. The negatives would be, I think he's very good and not great. And so my concern is, look, if you get me 1 year like you had at Auburn and you get me a national championship, I won't have a complaint. Be here for forever, right? But on the same note, I know the coach that Gus is, And I get worried because in some ways, not that dissimilar to Mario Cristobal, where you end up with these uber talented teams, might even win a game you weren't supposed to, but then drop one or two inexplicable games that don't make any sense. Last year, this team was better than 6-7. And they went 6-7 because they blew multiple leads that were like, it was almost impossible. I think they blew a 26-point fourth quarter lead against Baylor. Like,
Yeah, that was a
it was
crazy
just
game.
insane. And so ultimately, like, you can put that on the kids in terms of their execution, but it's the coordinator's jobs to call the right plays, and it's the head coach's job to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now Gus is the play caller again. I do think that matters. I think that will be helpful on offense. I think that and we'll, I'm sure, get into some of the logistics of this actual matchup and this actual roster this season. But, KJ Jefferson being at the helm feels like the right type of guy for Gus. But again, he's a stubborn guy, right? He brought in John Rice Plumlee, and John Rice Plumlee is going to be his guy. And a lot of UCF fans weren't so sure.
Yeah.
In some ways, maybe we're proven right in that, as Mikey Keene thrives at Fresno State, as Tommy Castellanos thrives at Boston College, took down FSU
Oh,
in a
I didn't
huge
realize
moment.
he was a UCF guy. Yeah.
Tommy
Wow.
Castellanos
Okay.
was our guy. Like, we were all of us were like hyped and ready. He was
Yeah.
a Gus recruit.
He's
Everybody was
fun.
hyped and ready for
Yeah.
him to be the guy. And then the loyalty to John Rice Plumlee is what drove Castellanos out. And obviously, as he balled out week one,
Yeah.
and then KJ struggled against New Hampshire, everyone was ready to lose their minds. So, all that said, I do think that, like, I am very happy that Gus Malzahn is my school's head coach. I think that he was the right guy for this moment for UCF. I think it all makes a ton of sense. And my hope is that he can continue to build the program into something special. My concern is that he may plateau just short of what the goals are, and that it really might be whoever the next guy is that's able to take UCF into hey, we are a perennial Big 12 championship game or championship game winner, right? Either in it or winning it, going to the playoff consistently, picking up 5-star recruits as opposed to 4-star recruit, that type of thing. I worry that it might be the next guy, but I'd like to think that Gus can prove me wrong. And who knows? Look, if somehow we go into TCU and go win big on national TV on Saturday night, you trust me, I'm going to be spending the next couple of weeks just riding the Gus Bus.
Flying the flag. Let's talk about Saturday night. I can sit here and I have so many big picture questions I want to ask you about UCF, but I want to honor your time.
Well, thank you.
I think this is a fascinating matchup. I had my feelings a little hurt when it wasn't the game day game. Why are you going to South Carolina when you could be? This to me has
a fun
a chance.
game.
It's a fun game. This could be. It could end up being a defensive struggle, but I think everyone's expecting to get a little bit of offensive fireworks Friday night. It's going to be a blackout game. The Carter, they announced, is already sold out.
Awesome.
So the atmosphere is going to be really, really electric. And I think that's why momentum is going to play such a huge part of this.
Oh, yeah.
And the team that can run the ball for 400 yards in the first half could very well steal momentum and never give it back. KJ Jefferson's a fascinating character because he obviously was the quarterback at Arkansas when Kendall Briles was the OC there. So Kendall's very, very familiar with KJ's game. But it seems like early on this season, KJ hasn't been asked to run the ball very much. Part of that's due to the fact you have, 4 guys behind him averaging 10 yards a carry. But also, it doesn't seem, I don't know if they've been saving that or if that's something we can expect. What are your early impressions of how he's performed, both in the running and passing game, and then how good is RJ Harvey, and how much am I going to hate him Saturday night?
Oh man, RJ Harvey's good. I'll get to that in a second. I'll start with KJ. KJ has had an interesting first couple of games, right? Because you play New Hampshire and then you play Sam Houston State. And so, your expectation is you're just going to annihilate both of them. And ironically, UCF did. They covered the giant spreads in both games. And it seemed, if you just look at the box score, pretty easy. KJ Jefferson had every single UCF fan pulling their hair out on basically in the first half of that New Hampshire game, because he was like shockingly inaccurate. And it was to a point where you almost wondered, like, does he have some level of nerves playing for a new program, even though it's an FCS game? Like, and that wouldn't make sense because he's coming from an SEC program and seemingly, played big games. I don't know what it was, but his execution in the first half of that New Hampshire game was horrendous, and it had all of us a little bit worried. And then he came in and played against Sam Houston State and was everything I hoped he would be. He was calm. He was in control. He was making the right reads, hitting open receivers. And when you're playing in Gus Malzahn's offense, that's your job. Occasionally, you're going to need to go make a big play, right? But the majority of what your job is, because of the way that this rushing attack, and mind you, this is not just RJ Harvey. It's a four-headed monster.
Penny Boone
in that
and
backfield. Penny Boone and Miles Montgomery
Yeah.
and Johnny Richardson. These dudes are all very good running backs. And so you have this stable of guys behind you. They're going to run the ball well. Johnny Richardson right now has the worst yards per carry in the backfield, and it's 6.5 yards per carry. Like, and I get it. They played two FCS schools,
but
right?
Still.
But that's how well this team is playing. 3 guys who've rushed for over 100 yards so far. RJ Harvey's in the top 10 in rushing yards and touchdowns. Like, he's a monster in his own right. I'm fascinated to see the way that KJ plays in this game and what Gus designs for him. Because I do think that this is what's interesting is, will they try to unleash different parts of this game? Will they have more designed quarterback runs for a powerful guy in KJ Jefferson? Will they have more? Will we see more RPOs this week? Will we see more just straight read options than we've seen the last couple of weeks? Giving KJ an opportunity to do things himself and going into, I mean, gosh, dude, if you were inaccurate at home against New Hampshire, you're going into a blackout at TCU in a big game for both programs. Like, if he can get into a passing rhythm early, I think UCF will be very successful.
Yeah.
But it's such a wild card because we haven't seen that much from him yet. And, sometimes in these games, it's like, and this is where it's also a wild card with Gus, is it's hit or miss. Sometimes in these games, he has like the most ingenious, slightly different game plan. And then other times he gets too cute and almost out coaches himself and tries to install, a double reverse with a sweep this direction. And all of a sudden, RJ Harvey's not really playing that much. It's actually Johnny Richardson in the backfield. And you're like, what are you doing? Just do what you do best.
Just run RJ Harvey.
Just run these guys into the ground. And so, to me, I think the biggest key in this game is time of possession. The way that, and I looked back at the stats. So, because I was enamored with the idea of KJ Jefferson's measurables looking like Cam Newton's, even though he is not even a 10th of the quarterback Cam Newton was. In the year that they won the national championship, Cam Newton and Auburn not only finished, I believe, number 6 in the country in rushing, but they were top 5 in time of possession. And what that meant was there were less opportunities for their defense to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? They just had the ball a lot longer. And it was because Cam Newton could rush and their entire backfield could rush. And so the hope, if you're UCF, is, hey, you have Ted Roof as your new defensive coordinator who, was an interesting hire, but thus far through 2 weeks, all the transfers have looked great. They look like they're flying around the field. And Ted Roof's defense maybe actually is better than what you had last year, which was one of the worst defenses in the country. And if they can even be mediocre as a defense, but then you control the ball for so much of the game that they can't make as many mistakes, that's how you win.
Yeah.
And so it really is, it's all going to be at the point of attack. It's going to be TCU's defensive line against UCF's offensive line. And whoever can win that battle, I think ultimately is who will win the game.
Which terrifies me a little bit because TCU's defense was also one of the worst in the country last year. They made a kind of outside the box hire, bringing in Andy Avalos, who'd been the head coach at Boise and was kind of excused for culture reasons. It seems to have been a good fit in Fort Worth, but we're seeing a lot of pressure. And I think where TCU has gotten in trouble in their first 2 games, especially against Ashton Daniels, who is a great running quarterback. He's not KJ Jefferson, but When he could break contain when things got off schedule, he was really successful running the ball against TCU, especially in the first half. And because TCU is living in the backfield, they're sending pressure. If KJ can step up and through that pressure, he's going to have open field to run to. So that to me is going to be the interesting thing. It's not so much the designed runs that concern me. It's when things break down.
It's great.
And he's such an athlete and he's so strong running the football. I think that could be a real issue. I think the only way TCU can stay in this game is by containing that running game. You're not going to stop RJ Harvey, but if they can contain the pocket, they can close the pocket, and they can keep KJ having to step back and throw. That's what makes this to me.
Look, put UCF in third and long. And you guys are gonna have. I mean, look, it's a similar thing for most programs, right? Sure. Like if you put any college quarterback in third and long, you're gonna feel good about that. But it's especially the case with UCF because their offense is so designed to like guarantee, hey, we're gonna rush for at least 6 yards on the first couple of plays, whether it's a 6-yard run, a 0-yard run, or a couple of 3-yard runs. We're gonna be 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, and be able to have any option on the table. If UCF's constantly 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, I haven't yet seen KJ Jefferson be that playmaker throwing the football. I've also only seen 2 games where they've been up so much that it hasn't been necessary. A guy that's an interesting X factor, if it then comes down to that, will be Xavier Townsend. Because Kobe Hudson's the number 1, and I am sure, obviously, in every respect, Andy Avalos will be game planning to stop him. Townsend is a electric player. He's the kick returner and punt returner. He, in the first couple games, almost broke one off. He's a very talented, versatile player. You could even see him in the backfield, maybe with some design.
Another guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was a kid who ran for a ton of yards in high school and, was a receiver as well. Right now, he's the number 2 receiver for UCF. And if you want to predict a wrinkle, maybe that's it, right? Maybe if UCF is trying to have a running back catch more passes out of the backfield, given the type of pressure that can be thrown at them by that TCU defensive line, maybe you even see Xavier Townsend in a 2-back backfield so that he's an option to catch some passes. So, I'm not sure what it's going to be here. And obviously in the same respect that you're concerned about the TCU, or rather the UCF offense, I'm concerned about that TCU offense. I see a team that came back late in the game against Stanford, led by a quarterback that dude's got moxie. Like I enjoy watching him play, and to see a player in Josh Hoover that has that level of confidence, that's going to have the crowd behind him, that a crowd, by the way, that probably, even if UCF takes a couple of touchdown lead, isn't going to be out of it because they've already seen their team come back and win against Stanford. That kills me. Like as someone who watched my team blow leads last year, I'm not going to be confident in a win until the final whistle blows. And I just think this is going to be a spectacular game. I can't wait.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a ton of fun. Kind of on that note, at what point, what will you want to see to start to think UCF can get this win on the road? Is there going to be a type of play? Is there going to be a type of feel? Like, what will you be looking for when your confidence starts to increase?
I will feel confident when there is a drive where UCF runs the ball like 7 or 8 times in a row for 5 or 6 yards per carry. You know what I mean? It's one of those drives. One of those drives. And who knows? I mean, that could be the first drive of the game, and all of a sudden I could feel confident. I know that's what they're going to try to do. And so if UCF can quickly establish, like, it's not going to be a couple of yards at a time and then hoping to complete a slant on 3rd down, but hey, we're going to get some chunk plays early and quickly and be able to run that stable of running backs. I'll feel very confident because I really think that it's been fascinating so far, because really it's been primarily RJ Harvey and Miles Montgomery who has been such a shock. He was a transfer from Cincinnati, and Penny Boone was everybody was talking about Penny Boone and how exciting it was to get him from Toledo, because he was top 10 in rushing yards last year at Toledo. And oh my God, him with RJ Harvey, holy cow, and Johnny Richardson and his speed. And Miles Montgomery might be the most complete back on the whole team. That's including RJ Harvey. Like, this dude has a burst. And so what's so interesting is last year, UCF played with a really fast pace. There was a lot of hurry up offense, even though they were running the ball. And this year, that pace has been like slow and steady wins the race. So they've been winding the clock down a little bit more, subbing running backs, and just saying like, all right, bring it on. And sometimes they're going drive by drive, but other times they'll be like, all right, RJ, here's the ball for 3 straight carries. All right, first down, you get out of here. Here comes Miles Montgomery for 2 carries. All right, here's Johnny Richardson on 3rd down. Here comes RJ again. And it's been fun to watch. So I'm obviously like, I'm sitting here being hopeful that that's the type of thing that can happen against TCU, but it's so hard. It's so hard to judge with only having played 2, bad programs. Sam Houston State, I'd like to give more credit. They are a good program within their own right, but like neither of them are anywhere close to the athletes on TCU. And so when you're grounded and pounding and you're way faster than everybody on the other team, it's really tough to know, does that speed translate? Are you still faster than these defensive backs at TCU or these linebackers at TCU, or is this an aberration? So I don't know. I have a lot of confidence. Like I certainly have probably too high of expectations for this season. But I also like believe in this team for a reason.
If you hear about someone passing out in the press box, it'll be because UCF put together an 8.5-minute drive where they ran the ball 11 out of 13 times, and then TCU scored a minute and a half later on 3 pass plays. Like
that's exactly what's going to happen.
Like
it's going to drive me up a wall. And but what's funny about that, right, is like, whose advantage is that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's UCF's if
I
you're
think
pounding
it's
on that defensive front, for 8 minutes, and then TCU comes back. And that, I think that's been one of the big, there's many complaints about Kendall Briles, but one of the biggest ones has been that he wants to play with so much tempo and so much pace, which is an effective style unless you can't stop anybody on the other side.
Well, and this was the issue. Honestly, this was the issue we faced last year. That was the exact problem that UCF had last year, which is that their defense couldn't stop anybody. And mind you, at least you're airing the ball out. Yeah. We were going 3 and out on 3 runs into the offensive line.
Painful.
Like, it was painful to watch. And you'd go 3 and out in 40 seconds on 3 rushes. You'd punt, and then you couldn't stop anybody. And it was like a nightmare. And especially in those moments where the other team was running the ball down your throat. So they're keeping the ball for 6, 7, 8 minutes. You're going 3 and out, and then they're doing it again. That's no fun to watch.
No.
But what I would say is that Kendall Briles and this TCU offense is far superior to what it was that we had going last year. In terms of, being able to move the ball and get the ball downfield. So I expect, like, I don't know if the final score will be a quote unquote fireworks score
on recording.
Oh man, I don't know. All right. So I'll say, just because I'm gonna pick UCF because
I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Yeah.
I'm gonna say, I'll say 34-28.
Okay.
UCF.
I like it.
And I think,
I hate it, but I like it,
right. I'm the reason I say that is I think it will feel like a higher scoring game than that. But again, because UCF's drives take a while, like, I think the success rate will be like a Big 12 game that should be 50-40. You know what I mean? Like, in that range. But because these drives can take a while when you're running the ball this type of way, and in turn, TCU, just to give their defense a break, might try to throw in some of those wrinkles and take a little bit longer just to sometimes give them a break. The score might be lower than the success rate of both offenses. But that's me being optimistic. That's me hoping for the best. And feeling like, look, I do believe all the things I just said. I do. I'm not saying them just to say them. I do believe that UCF can kind of pound the ball down just about anybody. Which is why I have the expectations of starting this season 6-0. Like, I really do. I want to win this game. And then it's Colorado, Florida, and Cincinnati, which are all 3 are like hyped up. Like, these next 4 games are about as fun in terms of hype as you can get as if you're a UCF fan, because you go on the road to a packed house at night in your first Big 12 opener. Then you get Colorado, which is just fun to beat up on if you can. Then we go to Gainesville, And then it's Cincinnati, who's, a team that we have some major history with now. So like, that's a
And it's
very
bad.
fun first half
So
of
you
your
could run
schedule.
them.
Yeah.
You could absolutely run them out, which would
Right.
be fun when you can
And
beat
so
your
it could
rival.
be, and all of a sudden, man, if you're starting 6-0, then you're starting to go crazy, and I will be, God, you won't want to listen to LeBatard because I will be insufferable.
Anything that gets less of Mike and Miami on the show, though, like I would much rather hear the UCF hype
so
train.
that what's gonna happen is I'm gonna end up with extreme little brother energy because Miami's gonna be ranked, by that point, if they're still undefeated, no matter what, they'll be like
top 6,
6,
probably
7, 8, or higher, probably, because some teams will drop off games, and even though Miami plays nobody, they will end up being right near the top, and we'll be like 16th. And I'll be like, look at us, the 2 programs in Florida. Huh? How about that?
You're gonna get sent to the penalty box.
Oh, nonstop. Yeah, no, I
I
already warned Mike, like, hey man, if this season goes the way I think it can go for both of us, you're not gonna be able to just celebrate Miami. I'm gonna be in there just bothering you guys. I don't care if I get sent to the penalty box every time I bring it up. It's gonna be fun.
Perfect. Last question before I let you get out of here. You've kind of hinted around it and what your expectations are, but what defines a successful season in year 2 of Big 12 play for UCF and Gus Malzahn?
That's a really good question. Look, I think that in my view, I have to try to look at this and be realistic. So like I was on a popular UCF podcast right before the season, and I predicted that the team would go 11-1.
Wow.
And that is too big of expectations to put, right? Like, even if that's my prediction, that can't be the definition of a successful season. That said, you're off to a 2-0 start, right? So to get to 9 wins, you need 7 more. And I look at some of these, and especially like, I just mentioned that the 3 games after this one, you should beat Colorado. Given the state of the Gators, you hope to, but maybe even should beat the Gators. Now, DJ Lagway looked really good. My greatest concern with that game, by the way, just so that everybody can be clear on it, they have a bye week the week before. My concern is they fire Billy Napier going into the bye week.
You get the bye week bump.
They've got the bye week bump, the interim head coach bump. They're willing to pull out every trick play in the book because they don't want to lose to UCF in their first game. I'm panicked about it. I've been sweating.
Panic. That's TCU fire Gary Patterson and beat a top 10 Baylor the next week. Yeah,
this
we know how that
is
goes.
Literally my nightmare. And so I've been so worried. I'm going to that game, and I am so worried that this like dejected Florida fan base is going to get to talk shit to me afterward. Apologies for the language.
You're allowed, right?
But nonetheless, I'm looking at those first, these next 4 games, and I'm looking at it as like, all right, you should get 3 wins in the next 4 for sure, right? Somewhere in there, whether it's a loss this week and then rattling off 3 in a row, whether it's a win this week and then winning 2 out of the next 3. So now all of a sudden you're 5-1. If you finish anything less than 8-4, it would be a disappointment. So I'll set the low bar on successful season at 8-4. I would say a truly successful season would be 10-2 or better. And I completely understand it's year 2 in a power conference, and maybe my biases from how much I was able and willing to hype up the American Athletic Conference in 2017 and 18 has ruined my ability to properly put in perspective the difference in talent between what was being faced then and what is being faced now. At the same time, I do look back at some of those teams, including an SMU team led by Sonny Dykes, and I see a lot of NFL players that ended up from all of those teams. Nonetheless, this year is a pretty wide open Big 12.
Yeah.
Like there's not a perfect team. The best team was and probably remains Utah, but Cam Rising is already banged up.
Yeah.
And
35 years old. So
yeah. And like, who knows, right? And so if he's banged up and Arizona's like a weird wild card of a team that could beat like anybody in the country and lose to anybody in the country, and Oklahoma State like was great last year and then we beat them by like 40. And so like none of it nothing is etched in stone in this conference. It's not like I'm looking at the SEC and seeing like, all right, well, there's Georgia, so that's automatically a loss, or there's Bama, and that's automatically a loss. I look at the schedule and I'm like, I'd be more surprised if this team finished 6-6 again than I would be if they finished undefeated. That's how I'll say it.
Yeah,
Is I'd be more surprised and if they do finish 6-6 off the Gus Bus and setting it on fire. Like I'm leading the parade for letting this guy go. So like that's how much I think the fan base can swing. I genuinely believe like this game on Saturday night, if UCF does not win this game, and it's largely because of Gus Malzahn's play calling and or the play of KJ Jefferson, like the fan base is fracturing and going into a bye week. It'll be a nightmare. So I'm praying for the win just so we can all have a nice good time and hype ourselves up before Colorado and actually want to go to Gainesville for that other game. So roundabout, I guess I was supposed to only say the score, but roundabout way of saying 34-28 UCF.
Jeremy, again, I just cannot thank you enough for jumping on with us. This has been such a blast, an absolute highlight for me. Where can people find any of your incredible work?
Melissa, thank you for having me. Your questions were great. This was so fun. Seriously, have me back whenever. I loved it. So if somehow we're looking at I don't know how it would be possible, but a Big 12 championship game, that's what I'm saying. Like,
no, you're coming out for that one.
If that happens, look,
Texas barbecue, we're gonna have a good time.
If that happens, I'll certainly be lobbying the LeBatard crew to send me out there. Maybe even with Lucy.
You and Lucy have got a road trip.
It'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's gotta happen. So
if UCF somehow makes the Big 12 championship game, I almost guarantee I will be there. Right. And so we'll make that happen. But seriously, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. For those of you who would like to follow me and the things that I'm doing, it's at Jeremy Taché. That's Tache on all platforms: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Still going to call it Twitter. Twitter's the place where I'm most active, but you know, there's pictures of my cats on Instagram and they're pretty cute. So you should probably follow there too. And trying to do TikTok more. I'm just old enough to where it's not second nature.
Yeah. Still uncomfortable. Still,
but
I get that.
I'm trying to get there.
Not a poster, I'm a lurker.
Right. I was a lurker for a while and I'm trying to get into the posting because it's my job. And so, yeah, you can follow me on all those places. Listen to Miami Mic'd Up podcast. That's my podcast for Bally. It's really fun. I love it. I had Jessica Smetana on last week. I had Mike Gold Jr. on this week. The 3 weeks before that, I had Miami Marlins players, and I probably will next week as well. So the majority of those interviews are South Florida sports based. I will say in October, I am supposed to have several members of the Miami Heat on the podcast, including potentially Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. We'll see. That's the hope. So yeah, that's fun. And then obviously, as Melissa has told you to do, listen to the Dan LeBatard show with Stugotz. If you want to, if you listen to this and you're like, wow, that guy stinks, I'd love to see him get bullied. Listen to the Dan LeBatard show.
That is exactly the thing to do.
Yeah, because that happens quite a bit. It's all love, though. Everybody loves each other. It's all bits.
It's all a bit. It's all a bit.
But yeah, Melissa, thank you seriously so much. This was a lot of fun.
All right, we really appreciate it. Looking forward to an absolute banger of a game Saturday night. I will be paying close attention to your Twitter feed throughout the contest, I am sure.
Yes,
thanks so much,
absolutely.
Jeremy.
Thanks, Melissa.